A peaceful family behind hidden turmoil. The Andersons appeared to be the picture-perfect suburban American family. Their classic colonial-style home stood on a leafy cul-de-sac in a quiet Illinois suburb, complete with a white picket fence, an immaculately maintained lawn, and a swing set in the backyard. They were the kind of neighbors everyone respected and quietly envied. Peter Anderson, the family patriarch, was a successful corporate attorney, known for his keen negotiating skills and impeccable suits. He was the type of man who worked long hours yet still coached his son Ethan's Little League baseball team on weekends. Laura, his wife, was every bit the quintessential suburban mom. She took pride in her neatly organized planner, ensured that every PTA meeting in her kids' school was flawlessly executed, and single-handedly prepared organic-packed lunches for Ethan every morning. On the outside, everything looked ideal. The Anderson children embodied the achieving all-American family narrative that Peter and Laura worked so hard to sell. Emily, the eldest at 18, was a driven high school senior applying to Ivy League schools, often boasting a GPA that sparkled as brightly as her collection of sports and academic medals from middle school. 16-year-old Mary, her younger sister, was a bubbly sophomore who excelled in debate and theater club, balancing academics with an active social calendar. Then there was Ethan, 6 years old, golden-haired and adored by his parents. Ethan was not just the baby of the family, but unequivocally the family's pride and joy. However, the polished veneer of the Anderson family belied cracks that had grown deeper with every passing year. The family may have had the look of a well-oiled machine, but behind closed doors, it was riddled with friction, jealousy, and emotional tension. The unspoken reality: not every member of the Anderson family felt seen nor heard. Laura, who spent her days spreading goodwill at Ethan's elementary school functions, was emotionally stretched thin. To the neighbors, she was the epitome of cheer, always showing up with fresh-baked cookies during neighborhood gatherings and maintaining polite, if distant, masking smiles. But within the Andersons' home, Laura often found herself caught between her daughter's growing resentment and Peter's demanding personality. Laura had learned to prioritize keeping the peace over fighting the losing battle of evenly distributing her care or attention. Emily, in particular, bore invisible wounds. Though she was Peter's child from a previous marriage, she had always considered him her father. Still, she'd often found herself grappling with an undercurrent of rejection, eclipsed not just by Peter's demanding career focus but now most acutely by the sheer, unrelenting affection he gave Ethan. Her brother from Peter's second marriage to Laura had essentially become everything Peter valued, his sole male heir, a continuation of the Anderson legacy. Emily did her best to dismiss the strong favoritism, burying herself in her studies and cultivating the effortless exterior of a high achiever. Yet, in her heart, smoldering embers of resentment flickered, sometimes igniting into outright hatred for the little boy who had stolen her father's priorities. And Mary? Sweet, agreeable Mary. She was a peacemaker by nature, but even she wasn't immune to the tension. Though younger than Emily, Mary harbored her own sense of exclusion. It wasn't that she hated Ethan, how could she? He was too innocent and young to knowingly sow discord, but she couldn't escape the omnipresent truth that his very existence reduced her standing too. It seems the Anderson household serves only one prince, Mary had joked one night during dinner, masking her frustration with humor. That quip, though brushed off as teenage sarcasm, stayed with Laura, who later cried alone in the kitchen among perfectly stacked rows of Tupperware. And then there was Peter. Oh, Peter. To him everything was a matter of keeping the family legacy intact. He wasn't cruel, in fact he was unfailingly polite and kind-hearted in his way, but Peter unconsciously planted seeds of division between his children. His firm belief that Ethan was destined to inherit not just his career accomplishments, but the values and character-building upbringing required to carry the Anderson name forward into future decades, left little emotional bandwidth for his daughters. Unbeknownst to him, or perhaps knowingly pushed aside, favoring Ethan had inadvertently fractured the stability underfoot. Though Laura tried discussing the imbalance, these conversations ultimately ended with Peter's resigned irritation. "Are you saying I shouldn't give him more attention when he's my only son?" Peter had once retorted during a tense exchange. Laura had walked away speechless. She didn't disagree with him entirely. Generations of inherent patriarchy were ingrained in their system, but she keenly felt the consequences of Peter's blind spots reflected back in her daughter's eyes every single day. On the surface of their suburban life, the Anderson household hummed along with precision and composure. But beneath this American dream were lives tangled in private dissonance, a mother drowning in appeasement, daughters quietly vying to reclaim love they thought they'd lost, and a father wholly unaware the stronghold he admired might soon crumble under its complexity. And in the eye of this quiet storm stood Ethan, blissfully unaware of the dangerous fault line his existence had drawn between his family members. Tensions within the family. At first glance, the Anderson home radiated perfection. Crafty scrapbook collages littered the kitchen counter, projects Laura loved tinkering with between PTA meetings and Ethan's soccer practice. Cheerful voices often filled the dining room during family dinners, and a large chalkboard calendar hung on the wall, mapping out each of the children's daily activities with color-coded precision. Yet beneath this orderly facade was a family unraveling at its seams. The cracks became most visible in the interactions between the children, though not everyone noticed them. Ethan, the youngest, embodied innocence and oblivion, a boisterous 6-year-old with golden curls and a laugh so infectious it could lift any room. But to his sisters Emily and Mary, that laugh symbolized something far darker: favoritism. Emily, at 18, often felt like a foreigner in her own home. She was the daughter Peter had tried so hard to make space for in his second marriage, but her stepmother Laura's presence often complicated things. At first, Emily simply rolled her eyes at Laura's overzealous attempts to win her over, forcing awkward bonding moments or overpraising mundane achievements on Facebook. Over time, however, the frustration morphed into spite. Emily began distancing herself emotionally, retreating into her room for hours on end, headphones clamped over her head as if to block out the world, or her family entirely. Her resentment for Ethan, though, was the most palpable. To Emily, Ethan wasn't just a younger brother, he had become a physical manifestation of her dwindling role in the family hierarchy. Ethan, the prince, embodied all the things that she wasn't: Peter's legacy, his golden child. Every time her father tossed him into the air with a chuckle, Emily felt that pang in her chest deepen. "So, what did you do today, buddy?" Peter would ask Ethan at dinner with an energy reserved just for him, as though his daughters sitting 2 chairs down were invisible. "Daddy took me to practice, and I scored 3 goals, Ethan piped. His toothy grin drove Peter to ruffle his hair fondly, proudly declaring, "That's my boy, my champion." Emily would sit with her fork hovering mid-air, her appetite vanishing along with her father's lineup of empty praises for herself. Her once polite smiles became tightened, forced grimaces. Her polite laughter eventually stopped altogether. But Mary, the middle child, bore her own emotional scars. 16 and perceived as the lovable peacemaker, she rarely caused the dramatic stirrings Emily was known for. To everyone else, Mary was well-adjusted, thriving even, with her honors classes, her theater rehearsals, and her group of energetic friends from debate club. But behind closed doors, Mary wrestled with her place in the family dynamic, a shadow cast both by Ethan and Emily's constant tug-of-war for attention. "I'm like wallpaper in this house," she confided to her best friend one evening during a sleepover. "Ethan gets dad, Emily gets to be dramatic, and me, I just exist." This was Mary's burden, a quiet indignation, simmering under her gentle demeanor. Sometimes that bitterness bubbled to the surface. One night, over dinner, Ethan beamed as he recounted how Peter let him ride in the passenger seat on the way back from karate class. "You're not even supposed to put kids in the front seat that young," Emily muttered under her breath, rolling her eyes. "Oh, relax, Em," Peter countered quickly. "He's fine. Let us dads have some fun, won't you?" Mary cracked a smile and joined in, but her tone carried weight. "It seems the Anderson household serves only one prince these days." The room fell silent. Laura gave a wary look, her fork limply resting against her plate. Ethan didn't register the comment, his world still perfectly unshaken as he stuffed mashed potatoes into his mouth. But Peter stiffened, narrowing his gaze at Mary with an unspoken warning, "Don't push it." Mary tried to laugh it off, but a faint flush crossed her face. This wasn't the first jab she'd thrown at Ethan, nor the last. Though she loved her little brother in theory, day-to-day interactions left her frustrated. She adored drama club because, if nowhere else, it was a space where she stood out, shone bright, without being overshadowed. Meanwhile, Laura, ever the mediator, sensed the tension deepening but felt paralyzed to stop it. She had spent years trying to cultivate the semblance of a cohesive family, crafting team-like holiday traditions and overcompensating with Pinterest-fueled birthday parties. She hoped shared laughter and planned outings would bridge the gaps, but reality refused to reflect her intentions. When Ethan got a new bike for his birthday, Emily had snarled, So does this make him the next Lance Armstrong now? Laura had scolded her for being disrespectful, but Emily stormed out mid-conversation. Meanwhile, Mary lingered just long enough to mutter, "It'd be nice if we even had a bike lane for all the special treatment," before drifting upstairs. The fights, though, didn't stop with the sisters. Laura often grew increasingly irked with Peter and their parenting disparities. "Do you not see what's happening here?" she hissed one night in the kitchen, her whispers crackling with exasperation. Peter, sitting squarely at the kitchen island with his laptop, barely glanced up. "Laura, they're teenagers, they're supposed to be a little moody," he replied dismissively. "It's not about that, Peter. Ethan's practically glowing under your spotlight while God, Peter, they're suffocating in his shadow. Emily barely even looks at you anymore. And Mary, when was the last time you had a real conversation with her?" Peter snapped his laptop shut louder than he meant to. "Jesus, Laura, can we please not do this tonight? I work 60 hours a week. You want me to come home and orchestrate some therapy session over dinner too?" "No one's asking for that. What they're asking for is your time, Peter." The conversation ended there like it always did, with both of them retreating to corners of the bedroom that suddenly felt too large. The Anderson house was split in subtle ways that went unvoiced, frustrations, disappointments, and jealousies accumulating like dust beneath the floorboards. Ethan, blissfully unaware, brightened every room he entered, oblivious to the storm clouds always gathering just behind him. The sisters simmered in their discontent, Laura strained under the weight of her household ambitions, and Peter, quietly defensive over his methods, believed the fragile balance could sustain itself. If only he knew how unstable that balance had already become. The deep-rooted cause, legacy and expectations. Peter Anderson believed in legacy. It wasn't just a word to him, it was an ideal, a purpose, a responsibility he carried like a badge of honor. He had worked hard to climb the ladder as a corporate attorney, and everything he built, the house, the reputation, the financial stability, felt like a foundation for something greater. But in Peter's eyes, that something greater couldn't exist without a proper heir to carry his name and values forward. To Peter, Ethan wasn't just his youngest child, Ethan was his legacy. He embodied the hope of continuity, a reflection of how Peter envisioned the Anderson name being passed down, shining bright for generations. What Peter failed to see was how his focused pride in Ethan distorted everything around him. When Peter married Laura, it was less about romance and more about practicality. She was a perfect partner for him, smart, capable, and willing to take on a blended family dynamic without hesitation. However, their life together became increasingly centered on Ethan, the son Peter never thought he'd have in his second marriage. Laura secretly noticed how Peter's priorities shifted, though she rarely voiced her discomfort. After all, Peter's relentless pursuit of success had always been their shared value. "Ethan is just a kid, he doesn't care about inheriting the Anderson name and some imaginary legacy," Laura once said during a late-night argument in the living room. Peter had looked at her incredulously, his jaw tightening. "It's not imaginary, it's real. Do you think I work 60-hour weeks for myself? I'm building something for him, for us, for this family. Peter, this legacy is choking everyone else here alive," Laura said, her voice cracking slightly. "Do you see how Emily looks at him? She resents him. You're not leaving a legacy, Peter, you're leaving behind cracks in this family." He sighed deeply, but didn't respond. What could he say? He believed Ethan deserved all the attention. Emily, to him, represented something more complicated, part of a past life he wanted to move beyond. She wasn't Laura's biological daughter, and Peter sometimes felt the distance between them, even though he loved her in his own stoic way. But love wasn't enough to make him fully see her. Emily's perspective was entirely different. She remembered a childhood when her father had been hers, fully, before Laura, before Ethan. Back then, Peter had been her rock, someone she could show her straight-A report cards to, and hear him say, "That's my girl." She'd felt so special in those moments, like she was the light of her father's world. But the second Laura entered their lives, things began to change. And when Ethan was born, Emily's sense of belonging as Peter's child completely disappeared. It didn't help that Peter took every opportunity to mold Ethan into the perfect Anderson heir, often overlooking the personal accomplishments of his daughters. "Wow, that's great, Em, another A," Peter had once said distractedly, barely looking up from a pile of work papers when Emily had been beaming about her perfect SAT score. That same evening, Peter spent 45 minutes on the phone arranging a birthday party for Ethan, complete with a magician and a bounce house. "You don't see it," Emily spat to Mary later in the family room, her voice low but dripping with contempt. "You don't see the way he lights up every time Ethan breathes in his general direction. But me? I could cure cancer and I think all I'd get out of him is a polite slow clap." Mary tilted her head but didn't argue. Part of her agreed. It wasn't that Peter didn't care for his daughters, he was kind, generous even when he was around, but the obvious favoritism for Ethan cast a shadow long enough to alienate both girls. Emily had learned to channel her frustration into ambition. If she couldn't win Peter's love, she figured, maybe she could outgrow it. Ivy League acceptance letters lined her desk, and internships stacked her resume like a tower of accomplishments ready to collapse under its own weight. But no matter how high she climbed, Emily never felt like it was enough. The little voice inside her head whispered, "He'll never love you like he loves Ethan." Mary, on the other hand, was less assertive but no less affected. As the middle child, Mary often felt overlooked, not ignored the way Emily claimed to be, but seen as good enough. She had given up trying to stand out in Peter's eyes a long time ago, instead filling her time with debate practice and theater rehearsals where the competition was fair, and her work paid off. Still, Mary couldn't help but notice how much energy her father poured into Ethan's upbringing. Ethan didn't just get expensive sports gear and private t-ball lessons from Peter. He got his father's unfiltered joy. Mary didn't have memories of Peter acting this way with her or Emily. It was always something reserved for the boy. "Do you know Dad's teaching Ethan to golf this weekend?" Mary mentioned one Saturday morning to Laura. Laura, flipping pancakes at the time, sighed and muttered, "Of course he is." Mary stirred her orange juice idly, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "Maybe one day I'll be graced with a lesson on parallel parking." Laura froze for a second at Mary's dry humor, giving her a look that was equal parts guilt and resignation. "Honey, it's not fair." "Yeah, I know," Mary interrupted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's fine, Mom, I'm over it." Laura wasn't convinced. As much as she tried to compensate with small gestures, shopping trips for the girls, late-night heart-to-hearts about their school crushes, she knew it wasn't enough to fill the void Peter left. Peter, meanwhile, remained largely oblivious to the damage his actions were causing. To him, the idea of legacy wasn't a choice, it was a duty. Ethan needed to inherit strength, resilience, and a vision for the future Peter believed was essential for being an Anderson. "You sound like some medieval lord," Laura once joked, though there was steel underneath her humor. "Like Ethan's supposed to inherit the kingdom. Meanwhile, the girls are what? Sent off to marry dukes in another fiefdom?" Peter didn't appreciate the comment. He saw Ethan as an opportunity, a way to fix what had gone wrong with his first marriage and prove, to himself and others, that he could succeed as a father. But what he saw as responsibility, the rest of the family experienced as imbalance. And that imbalance, growing unchecked over the years, had festered into something neither Peter nor Laura could contain anymore. For Ethan, life was innocent and carefree. But for Emily and Mary, it was a competition for relevance in a household where their accomplishments were slowly being drowned out by the bright, glowing future their father imagined for the family's only son. Underneath their polished suburban life, the Anderson family was walking a tightrope of unmet needs and unspoken resentments, one precarious enough to crumble at the smallest push. The eldest sister's resentment. Emily never wanted to admit it out loud, but she hated Ethan. It wasn't the kind of hate that exploded loudly in fiery words or slammed doors. It was quieter, colder, a slow simmer that had been brewing for years. To her, Ethan was the reason her once solid place in the Anderson family hierarchy had crumbled into irrelevance. "He's not even my real brother," she had confessed once to her best friend Jennifer during a late-night study session. "He's just this constant reminder of how replaceable I really am." Jennifer had nodded sympathetically, but she didn't press further. No one really understood the depth of Emily's resentment, not her friends, her mother, or even Emily herself some days. The relationship between Emily and Ethan had always been strained, but it wasn't always like this. When Ethan was born, Emily, just 12 at the time, had been thrilled. She remembered standing cautiously next to the hospital bed, peeking over Laura's shoulder to stare at the tiny wriggling bundle. "He's so small," Emily had whispered in awe. "He's your baby brother," Laura had said warmly, stroking Ethan's cheek. "And he's going to look up to you so much someday. You're his big sister. You'll take care of him, right?" Emily had nodded enthusiastically then, eager to step into her new role. But what no one told her, what she couldn't have anticipated, was that taking care of her baby brother would soon feel like her full-time job. Ethan's arrival shifted everything. Where she once had her father's undivided attention, Now Peter's world seemed to revolve entirely around his son. "He's the only boy. The Anderson name rests on him," Peter often said, as if this were enough explanation to justify the imbalance of his affections. Suddenly, Emily started noticing all the little ways she was being sidelined. The nights when Peter canceled their regular father-daughter movie dates to help Ethan build a Lego set, the family dinners where Ethan's karate achievements eclipsed every academic milestone Emily struggled so hard to reach. "He's 6, Emily had snapped during a heated argument with Peter one Thanksgiving. "Who cares if he learned how to break a plank? I just won the regional math competition, but no one even noticed because we had to rush out of there for his stupid belt ceremony." "Watch your tone, Emily," Peter had warned, his voice razor-sharp. "Don't make this about you. Your little brother worked really hard for that belt." "So did I," she had fired back, but her words hit the floor, unnoticed as Peter turned his attention back to Ethan, who was noisily sipping chocolate milk through a straw. By the time Emily hit 18, her passive resentment had begun to mutate into something more malicious. Every interaction with Ethan seemed to set her off. "Hey Em, can you help me tie my shoe?" Ethan had asked one morning, holding his little sneaker out toward her. "Figure it out yourself," Emily snapped, not even looking up from her phone, "but I don't know how." "Then maybe Dad can tear himself away from your Little League stats long enough to teach you," she shot back venomously. Her words cut in a way Ethan didn't fully understand, but it didn't matter. Ethan wasn't one to process rejection deeply. He simply shrugged and wandered off in search of Laura, humming to himself as if nothing had happened. And that only fueled Emily's anger more. "He's so perfect all the time. Mr. Sunshine, Mr. Favorite," Emily muttered under her breath that day, glaring out the window as Ethan tottered off to the backyard. Laura noticed the growing hostility, but no matter what she said or did, she couldn't fix it. "You've got to stop talking to him like that," Laura confronted Emily one afternoon while folding laundry. "He's just a kid, Em. He doesn't deserve this from you." "Deserve this?" Emily laughed humorlessly. "He gets everything, Mom. Dad worships the ground he walks on. You pack him organic lunches every morning like he's the Prince of Monaco or something. And me? I had to beg you for a ride to school every day last semester." "That's not fair," Laura said softly, though the guilt in her voice betrayed her. "No, it's not fair," Emily shot back, her voice rising. "But this whole family has revolved around him from the second he showed up and no one even notices. I'm invisible in this house, so don't tell me to be nice to him. I can't stand him. I can't stand any of this." Laura stood frozen for a moment, sock in hand. Ethan's laughter echoed from somewhere outside, oblivious to the storm raging inside his sister's heart. Behind closed doors, Emily's animosity deepened into a more dangerous pattern. She started taking petty revenge on Ethan in small ways, hiding his favorite toys, texting him fake messages on her mom's phone, pretending playdates got canceled. She even once spilled juice into Ethan's homework and blamed it on his clumsiness, reveling at the sight of his tears. "Emily, why would you do that?" Laura demanded when she discovered the truth. Emily shrugged, feigning indifference. "I didn't do anything. Maybe the golden child isn't so perfect after all." One night, after overhearing Peter's glowing monologue about Ethan's leadership potential over dinner, Emily stormed upstairs and slammed her door so hard the hinges rattled. "It's not fair," she whispered to herself over and over. Tears streamed down her face as she balled her hands into fists. "Why does he get everything? Why can't it just be me again? Why am I not enough?" Meanwhile, Ethan remained blissfully unaware of the depth of his sister's resentment. He idolized Emily, as younger siblings often idolize older ones, and constantly sought her approval despite her coldness. "Look at me, Em!" Ethan yelled one summer afternoon as he balanced precariously on his bike without training wheels for the first time. But Emily didn't look, not even a glance. Instead she turned away, earbuds stuffed into her ears, and muttered, "Great job, Einstein. Want a medal?" Even if Ethan heard her, he didn't let it show. He laughed instead, wobbling his way to victory as Peter clapped enthusiastically from the other side of the driveway. And perhaps that was the most infuriating thing for Emily. No matter how cruel or dismissive she was, Ethan couldn't be broken. His joy was unshakable, his innocence unscathed, and his place in their father's heart seemed unshakable. But as Emily spiraled further into her resentment, somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew this wasn't sustainable. It couldn't be. Because part of her didn't just want Ethan out of her life, she wanted her role back. She wanted to feel seen. She wanted to feel loved the way she once had. But deep down, she also knew, if things continued this way, she might do something she truly couldn't take back. The influence of an outsider. Emily Anderson was 18 when Jack stormed into her world like a brash, unapologetic whirlwind. Jack wasn't the kind of boy Laura or Peter Anderson would have wanted their daughter to date, or even befriend for that matter. But to Emily, Jack was exactly what she needed. He wasn't polished, predictable, or content to play by the rules. He was the complete opposite of her carefully curated suburban life, and in her eyes, he was her escape. Jack was 20, unemployed, and had a spotty record that whispered of high school fights and reckless decisions. His leather jacket and perpetually scruffy appearance screamed rebellion, and although he lacked any immediate prospects, he prowled through life as if society's rules didn't apply to him. The two met at a coffee shop on the outskirts of town, Emily ditching an SAT prep course and Jack just hanging around for no discernible reason except his girlfriend worked there. They struck up conversation when he borrowed a pen from her, scratching down barely legible notes in a crumpled notebook. "Here," Emily had said, handing over the pen with mild annoyance. "Thanks. Don't worry, princess, I'll give it back," he'd grinned, leaning back in his chair like he owned the shop. The nickname might have annoyed her any other day, but instead, she found herself smirking. He wasn't like the boys in her AP calculus class, those clean-cut honors students with dreams of med school who quoted bland dialogue from Marvel movies. Jack had a rawness about him, something untamed and dangerous. Later that week he made an offhand remark about how everyone in this rich town seemed miserable despite their gleaming houses and shiny SUVs. Emily burst into laughter, real, uncontrolled laughter, because Jack had hit the bullseye without even trying. He didn't know her family, but somehow, he managed to describe it perfectly. The relationship blossomed quickly, even though Jack operated on the fringes of her life. Emily never brought him home, choosing instead to meet him at parks, late-night diners, or parking lots on school nights, places where no one would recognize her or tell her parents. Jack loved to mock the suburbs. "Let me guess," Jack teased one evening as they sat in his dented pickup truck eating fast food. "Your mom's got one of those chalkboards in the kitchen with everybody's schedules on it, right? Soccer practice, dentist appointments, and Pilates at noon." Emily rolled her eyes but smiled. "It's not Pilates, it's yoga, and yes, we have the stupid chalkboard." Jack laughed, shaking his head. "Your house sounds like some kind of Stepford nightmare." "It is a nightmare," Emily murmured, staring out the windshield. Her mood shifted instantly, the weight of her family's dysfunction pressing down. "My dad doesn't even notice I exist anymore. As long as Ethan's getting trophies or learning karate moves, I might as well not be there." "That the little brother?" Jack asked. "Yeah, the golden boy, my dad's legacy." The venom in her voice caught Jack's attention. "Sometimes I wonder what it'd be like if he were just gone." Jack raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the intensity in her tone. "Gone?" Emily shrugged, playing it off as a joke. "I mean, not dead or anything, just not there. It'd be nice to not have to hear about how great he is for once in my life." "Sounds like he's a pain in the ass," Jack said, going along with it while assessing her mood. "You have no idea," Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. Over the weeks, Jack became Emily's confidant, the person she vented to when the walls of her home felt too suffocating, not Mary, not her friends at school. It was Jack, this outsider who didn't care about her GPA, her college prospects, or maintaining appearances. Jack simply listened, often casually stoking the flames of her anger with biting commentary about suburban life. "People like your parents," Jack began one night. "They make everybody think life's supposed to be this perfect formula, nice house, perfect kids, expensive cars. But it's all fake. You see it though, that's why you're not like them." Emily felt seen in a way no one else made her feel. Jack validated her bitterness, made her believe she wasn't overreacting or being irrational, and slowly they began to bond over the idea of rebellion, not just against authority but against the life their parents wanted them to live. "Bet they want you to go to some ivy-covered college, marry a finance bro, and have kids who all look like Ralph Lauren models," Jack snorted one night. Emily laughed, but underneath the humor was the painful truth that her father's opinion of her future mattered more than she wanted it to. And Peter no doubt wouldn't approve of Jack, not his greasy hands, his smirking defiance, or his habit of chain-smoking in parking lots. When Jack started visiting Emily more frequently, things took a darker turn. It started innocently enough. He'd drive her home from hidden meetups or pick her up late at night when she wanted to escape the suffocating quiet of the Anderson house. But their conversations began to circle around recurring themes: her resentment for Ethan, her father's favoritism, and the incessant pressure to be perfect. One evening, as they loitered by the town's abandoned train yard, Emily let the full weight of her frustration spill out. "My dad doesn't care about me. My mom's so busy obsessing over Ethan's stupid school projects or playdates that she doesn't even notice when I'm gone, Emily ranted. Ethan gets whatever he wants, the whole world bends over backward for him. Jack tilted his head, studying her expression. So what are you gonna do about it? What do you mean? Emily asked, frowning. Jack smirked. You keep saying how unfair it all is, but you're smart. You've got options, Em. You don't have to sit there and take it. Emily crossed her arms, unsure if Jack was just joking or planting something far more dangerous in her head. And what exactly would I do, Jack? You think I'm gonna throw him in my trunk and drive him out of town? Jack chuckled, but behind his laughter was something sinister. Hey, I'm just saying. Sounds like Kid Wonder's the root of all your problems. Maybe you should take the focus off him for once. Shake things up a little. Emily laughed weakly, but her mind lingered on his words longer than it should have. From that point on, Jack's presence in her life wasn't just about rebellion. It became a catalyst for ideas she might have never entertained alone. He had a way of taking her passing remarks about Ethan and turning them into threads of logic that somehow felt justified. Sometimes you've got to force things to change, he would tell her during one of their late-night drives. If you want respect, you've got to demand it. People like your dad, they don't just give it to you, you've got to make them pay attention. And Emily, tired of fighting for scraps of acknowledgement in her own home, began to wonder if Jack was right. Jack wasn't just an outsider. He became a mirror for Emily's darkest thoughts, the ones she suppressed in front of her family, her friends, even herself. And though she didn't yet realize it, his influence was steadily pulling her toward a decision that would alter the course of her family's lives forever. A sinister plan takes shape. What began as idle frustration soon spiraled into something far darker. Emily hadn't meant for the small, fleeting bitterness toward her brother to grow into what it became. But Jack had this way of taking the scattered pieces of her resentment and molding them into something tangible. A plan, a solution, a way to fix what had gone horribly wrong in her life. It was Jack who first suggested they do something about Ethan. Emily laughed it off at first, dismissing it as one of his sarcastic quips. They had had plenty of those, muttering jokes about ditching suburbia, torching Peter's precious chalkboard calendar, or stealing Laura's minivan for a cross-country getaway. But this time, Jack wasn't joking. He leaned in closer during one of their late-night conversations in his rusted pickup truck, his steady gaze daring her to meet him halfway. You're always talking about how perfect Ethan is, Jack began, lighting a cigarette as he spoke. His tone was causal, but there was a sharpness underneath, something calculated. How your parents worship him like he's the golden boy, right? So, what if we, I don't know, dimmed his shine a little? Emily froze mid-sip of her black coffee, her legs curled up under her in the passenger seat. Dimmed his shine? She repeated, feigning ignorance, though her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know where this was going, but Jack's words seemed to linger too long in the air, like smoke that refused to dissipate. Jack smirked, tapping ash into an empty fast food cup. Look, I'm not saying anything crazy, all right, but you've been miserable since this kid showed up and ruined everything for you. You deserve to catch a break. Maybe it's time Ethan takes a little detour. He glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. You were saying just last week how you wished he'd disappear for a while, weren't you? Emily opened her mouth to argue, to tell him she hadn't meant it seriously, but the words wouldn't come, because in the darkest corners of her mind, she knew the thought had been there. She had wondered so many nights alone in her room, what life would be like if Ethan wasn't around. Not dead, she told herself, just gone, long enough for her to reclaim what had once been hers. She exhaled a sharp breath, shaking her head. That's insane, Jack, my parents would never let it. They won't even know, Jack cut in, tossing the cigarette butt out the window with an aggressive flick of his wrist. His voice softened, coaxing now. Think about it. If he's out of the picture even for a little while, suddenly all eyes are on you. No more Little League trophies stealing the spotlight. No more Dad canceling your plans because Ethan needs help with his stupid coloring projects. Emily crossed her arms, chewing the inside of her cheek as her mind raced. And what exactly am I supposed to do? Toss him into the woods and hope he wanders back out when I go off to college? Jack laughed, the sound low and menacing. Not exactly, but you don't have to think big. He trusts you, doesn't he? You're his big sister. It wouldn't take much to get him to go along with whatever you say. Over the next few days, Emily tried to push the idea out of her mind. She distracted herself with studying for finals, binge-watching episodes of her favorite sitcom, and hanging out with Mary after school. But no matter what she did, Jack's words clawed their way back to her thoughts. It was too stupid, too risky. There were too many ways it could go wrong. Yet for every argument she came up with, Jack countered it during their late-night meetups. He had an uncanny way of breaking her down, turning her guilt into justifiable anger, her fear into determination. One night, parked in the shadowy lot of an abandoned strip mall, Jack pressed her again. It's simple. It doesn't have to be permanent or violent or anything dramatic, just long enough to make a statement, shake up the family dynamic, get people to see you for once instead of the golden boy. Emily hesitated, staring out the windshield at the flickering streetlights. Part of her wanted to get out of the truck and walk away, leave Jack and his toxic ideas behind. But part of her, a deeper, angrier part, wanted to hear more. She wrapped her arms around herself, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you even talking about? Jack pulled out a map of the area he'd scrounged up from somewhere, its edges crinkling in the dim overhead light. Look, we take him somewhere isolated. Not far, maybe the woods behind the park or that old bridge near the outskirts of town. Somewhere quiet where no one's gonna bother us. Emily stiffened. Us? Yeah, us, Jack said, flashing her an incredulous look. You don't think I'm letting you do this alone, do you? I'm not a complete monster, princess. She rolled her eyes, her fingers nervously drumming against the dashboard. So what, we just leave him there? Jack shrugged nonchalantly. Not exactly. We make it look like he wandered off. Like maybe he followed some stray dog or got curious about the trees or whatever kids his age do. He grinned, leaning closer. You're his sister. He'll go wherever you lead him. Emily's chest tightened. Jack's plan was simple. Far too simple. She thought of Ethan's wide, trusting eyes, his little hand grabbing hers without hesitation whenever they crossed the street. She thought of Laura's panic, Peter's fury if anything were to happen. What about Mary? How would she react if her baby brother disappeared on her watch? It's just for one night, Jack added, sensing her doubt. Maybe two. Make your parents squirm a little. Let them worry for once about someone other than their precious heir. 2 nights? Emily spat, her voice laced with sarcasm. You want me to ruin my life for 2 nights of attention? Ruin your life? Jack scoffed. You're fixing it, Em, don't you get it? Over time, Jack's persistence wore her down. Each night they spent together, the plan grew more detailed. Jack suggested items they'd need, snacks, flashlights, some rope, just in case. Emily hated herself for not calling it off, for letting it evolve past idle talk, but the thought of being noticed, of making her parents truly see her, had become intoxicating. The pair decided on a cold December night to put it into action. The colder the better, Jack had reasoned. People panic faster in bad weather. You'll be front-page news. Emily clenched her teeth at his words but didn't argue. Deep down she knew this was bigger than she intended. She told herself it was temporary, manageable. She convinced herself it wasn't too late to stop, but as they finalized every detail, the route, the excuse she'd give Ethan, the alibi she'd tell anyone who asked, Emily couldn't help but feel she'd already crossed the point of no return. The sudden tragedy. It all happened so fast, so catastrophically fast, that Emily barely understood how everything spiraled out of control. There were moments, tiny, flickering moments, where she thought about calling it off, where the weight of her guilt bubbled to the surface, begging her to stop. But by the time the plan was set into motion, it was far too late to turn back. The night started slow, unremarkable. It was cold, colder than expected for early December, and the wind whipped at the trees outside the Anderson household. Inside, Ethan had just finished dinner and was glued to a cartoon on the television. Laura was in the kitchen icing cupcakes for a bake sale, and Peter was buried in some files he'd brought home from work. If anyone had noticed Emily's nervous energy, they didn't say anything. She paced in her room, her hands shaking as she checked her phone for updates from Jack. Jack, you ready? Emily, I don't know about this. Jack, stop second-guessing. This is what you wanted. Emily, fine, give me 10 minutes. Emily had rehearsed her lie a dozen times over in her head. When the moment came to execute it, the words left her mouth without hesitation. Hey, Ethan, she said, crouching down near him after the commercial break and flashing her best big sister smile. Want to go on a secret mission with me? Ethan's wide, curious eyes lit up immediately. A mission? Like a spy mission? Exactly, Emily replied. Dad's birthday is coming up, right? I thought it'd be cool if we got him a super secret surprise, just you and me, but we can't tell anyone, not even Mom. Ethan was already reaching for his sneakers, his excitement bubbling over. What kind of surprise? Is it a bike? Does Daddy like bikes? You'll see, Emily said, grabbing his jacket and steering him toward the door. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat louder than the last. She forced herself to keep a calm exterior as she shouted into the kitchen, "Mom, I'm just taking Ethan out for a bit. Be back soon." Laura poked her head out from behind the counter, mid-swirl of frosting. "Did Ethan finish his homework?" "Yes," Emily lied smoothly. "Don't worry, it's just a quick trip." Laura gave a distracted nod and went back to her baking. Peter didn't even look up from his files as they walked out the door. Jack was waiting in his beat-up pickup truck a block away. The windows fogged slightly from the cold as Emily slid into the passenger seat, Ethan climbing in behind her. "Why's he here?" Ethan asked, tilting his head toward Jack. "He's helping us with the mission," Emily said, her tone clipped as she avoided Jack's amused smirk. "Hey buddy," Jack said over his shoulder, "you ready for some fun?" Ethan didn't respond right away, suddenly shy, but he nodded, clutching his jacket like it was armor. The drive to the woods behind the park made Emily's skin crawl. Jack hummed along to some rock song on the radio, tapping the steering wheel as if they were on a casual road trip. Ethan babbled in the back seat about how he wanted to get Peter something super cool. Emily sat stiffly, her nails digging into her palms as the road stretched on, the tension tightening like a noose around her neck. When they arrived, Jack pulled the truck to a stop at the edge of the park, where the faint glow of town lights faded into murky shadows. The woods loomed dark and uninviting, bare branches clawing at the night sky. "All right," Jack said, cutting the engine. "This is it." Ethan hopped out eagerly, but Emily hesitated. She could see her breath in the chilled air, each exhale a reminder that they still had time to stop. "Jack," she whispered harshly as they stood by the truck. "Are you sure about this? He's just a kid." Jack rolled his eyes, impatient. "That's the point, Em. Stop freaking out. We'll drop him here for a couple of hours, your parents will panic a little, and then he'll be back, safe and sound. Game over." Emily swallowed hard, glancing at Ethan, who was busy stomping on a pile of leaves, giggling at the crunching sound. Her heart twisted painfully, but she forced her feet to move. "Ethan!" she called. "Over here! This way!" He followed her without hesitation, his small hand slipping into hers as they walked toward the tree line. The trust in his innocent gaze was unbearable, and for a brief moment, Emily thought she might vomit. "What are we looking for?" Ethan asked, shivering slightly as the cold bit through his jacket. Emily hesitated, searching for an answer. A cool hiding spot for Dad's surprise. We're scouting, remember?" "Oh," Ethan said, nodding sagely, as though this made perfect sense. Jack trailed behind, his presence looming like a storm cloud, when suddenly he spoke, his voice low and carrying an edge. "This spot looks good. Let's hang here for a bit." Ethan looked around, confused. "But there's nothing here?" "Exactly," Jack said flatly. And that's when things began to unravel. Ethan asked to go back to the truck after an hour. It was cold, and he was getting tired. Emily quickly agreed, her panic mounting as guilt clawed at her chest. But Jack's expression hardened. "Not yet," Jack said firmly, his eyes flashing in the dim light. "But he's freezing!" Emily snapped, stepping between Jack and her brother. "You knew what we were doing," Jack said, his tone cold now, a threatening undercurrent she hadn't heard before. "We can't just stop because you're feeling guilty." Ethan started to cry softly, rubbing his hands together. "I want to go home, Em. I don't like this game anymore." "Okay, we're done," Emily whispered, grabbing Ethan's hand and trying to pull him away. But Jack stepped in front of her, his voice rising. "Don't blow it now! We're almost there! Just let him stay a bit longer!" The shouting only made Ethan cry harder, and the sound, his innocent, heartbroken sobs, pushed Emily over the edge. "We're leaving," she said forcefully, trying to guide Ethan away. "What, so you're just gonna waste everything? You brought me into this!" Jack yelled. Things happened in a blur after that. Jack moved too fast, his rage surging as he grabbed Ethan's arm. The boy screamed, trying to pull away as Emily slapped Jack's hand. "Let him go, Jack!" she screamed, but Jack had already lost control. His shove was hard, too hard, and Ethan fell backward into the uneven brush. There was a sharp crack as his head struck a large rock hidden beneath the leaves, and the screaming stopped. Everything stopped. Emily staggered backward, her hands covering her mouth as horror washed over her. Ethan didn't move. His small frame lay motionless in the dirt, his tiny body suddenly frail and lifeless under the cold moonlight. Jack froze too, his bravado crumbling as he stared at what he'd done. "God, oh my God, Emily!" "No, no, no, no," Emily whispered, dropping to her knees beside Ethan. "Ethan, wake up, please wake up." But he didn't stir. "What the hell do we do?" Jack hissed, pacing in frantic circles. Emily couldn't answer him. Tears streamed down her face as she cradled Ethan's lifeless body, the enormity of what they'd done sinking in like the chill of the December wind. At that moment there was no plan, no justification, only the irreversible tragedy of a decision gone horribly wrong. The family falls into chaos. The Anderson house should have been quiet that evening, like so many others before it. Dinner dishes should have been drying by the sink. Laura should have been relaxing with a book or a Hallmark movie. Ethan should have been snuggled into bed with a bedtime story, and Peter should have been typing quietly on his laptop. But instead, the house was plunged into chaos the moment Laura realized Ethan was nowhere to be found. The timeline unraveled before Laura's eyes with heart-stopping clarity. She had been in the kitchen, distracted by swirling frosting onto cupcakes for a PTA bake sale. Emily had casually called out, "Mom, I'm just taking Ethan out for a bit. Be back soon." Laura, engrossed and trusting, had barely looked up, and now, hours later, they weren't back. The cupcakes sat untouched on the counter as Laura paced the living room, her phone locked in a white-knuckled grip, dialing Emily's number for the 6th time. Voicemail. Again. "Pick up! Pick up! Pick up!" Laura muttered desperately, the words breaking into a frantic whisper. She turned, eyes locking on Peter, who stood by the window, his jaw clenched so tightly that his temples pulsed. His laptop sat forgotten on the coffee table. The air between them buzzed with tension, but neither of them spoke. It had been Peter who snapped first. "Why the hell did you let her take him, Laura?" His words cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and cold. What are you—" Laura stammered, her voice cracking. "She's his sister, Peter. It's not like I expected Emily to. I trusted her." "And now Ethan is gone," Peter shouted, throwing his hands in the air. "It's almost midnight, Laura. Midnight. Do you even know where they went? What they were doing?" "Of course I don't," she shot back, her voice rising. "I didn't think she'd disappear with him. Oh my God, where is he? What if—" Her voice broke and tears spilled freely down her face as she gripped the back of the couch for stability. "What if something's happened to him? Something happened because you weren't paying attention," Peter yelled, his frustration boiling over. "You were so busy with your damn cupcakes and your bake sale garbage that you didn't even think to ask her where she was taking him." Laura froze, stunned by the venom in his words. Her mouth opened, but she couldn't find anything to say in her own defense, because on some level she felt it was true. She had let Emily take Ethan without question. She had never considered even for a second that something like this could happen. "How dare you?" she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "You think this is my fault? You're hardly here, Peter. You barely know what's going on in your own house. You don't know Emily like I do. You don't know Ethan like I do. If anyone's to blame—" "Don't even think about turning this around on me," Peter roared, closing the distance between them. "I work my ass off to take care of this family, and you can't even keep track of the kids for one goddamn night." Laura stepped back, the fire in her eyes fading into something softer, more broken. "He's our son, Peter," she whispered, raw and defeated. "And he's out there. Somewhere." A thick silence followed, heavy enough to crush them both. In the corner of the room, the clock ticked ominously, a cruel reminder of every second Ethan remained missing. It wasn't long before Laura called the police. She had hesitated at first, clutching the phone tightly, her fingers trembling over the buttons. She knew that once she called, the situation would spiral out of her control, taking on a life of its own. But she couldn't bear the thought of wasting more time. The call was brief and panicked. Laura's voice cracked through her tears as she gave as much information as she could. Ethan was 6, blonde, blue-eyed, wearing a navy blue jacket. He had left hours ago. Emily hadn't answered her phone. The dispatcher's calm tone did nothing to soothe her frayed nerves. "We'll send out an officer to take a statement and start a search. Stay where you are, ma'am." When the first officer arrived, the questions came quickly and mercilessly. "When was the last time you saw your son? Who was he with? What was your daughter's behavior like before she took him?" Laura answered everything in a rushed stream of consciousness, her words overlapping Peter's increasingly curt, measured responses. "It was Emily," she finally blurted out with a trembling voice. "Our oldest. She took him out for— I don't know, she said something about a quick trip." "Did she say where?" the officer asked, pen poised. "No," Laura murmured, her face buried in her hands. "Have you had trouble with your daughter before?" the officer pressed. Peter cut in, his voice firm. "She's not the type to harm him, if that's what you're asking." But he faltered, and Laura felt the hesitation settle like lead in her chest. Was Emily capable of something terrible? The thought hadn't occurred to her before, but as the reality of the situation sank deeper, doubts clawed their way into her mind. She thought about the tension, the arguments, and Emily's growing distance over the past few years. And then, unbidden, came the memory of one of Emily's dry, sarcastic comments. Guess he gets to be king of the house, huh? As hours bled into the early morning, the house became a collision of emotions. Laura paced relentlessly, her sobs racking her body while she wrung her hands raw. Peter, uncharacteristically silent, stared out the window, his face unreadable but haunted. Neither of them could stop blaming each other, or blaming themselves. It wasn't until another officer called from the search team that the true weight of the nightmare set in. "We found him," the officer began cautiously over the phone. His tone was measured, but in a way that prickled with something ominous. Immediately Peter and Laura clung to the edges of hope. "Where?" Peter demanded. "Is he okay?" Laura's voice cracked, desperate and panicked. There was a pause, just long enough to shatter them. We found his body in the woods near the park," the officer said carefully. It appears there may have been foul play. We're still gathering details, but you'll need to come down to the station." For confirmation," he added softly. Laura collapsed onto the floor, her knees giving out as her hands clutched at nothing. Her wails ripped through the room, raw and unrestrained. Peter staggered back like he'd been punched, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for air. His entire body seemed to cave in, folding under the weight of grief that hit like a tsunami. "No, no, no!" Laura screamed between sobs. "Not my baby! Not my Ethan! Please, no!" Peter tried to reach for her, but she batted him away, her grief taking the shape of rage. "How could you let this happen? How could we?" "Laura," Peter whispered, but even he had no words. His tears streamed silently as he sunk into a chair, his hands trembling. The house, once a polished picture of suburban life, had turned into a battleground of grief and shattered trust. Every corner of it seemed to echo with memories of Ethan, his laughter, his small sneakers by the door, his tiny voice calling, "Mommy, look what I made!" These ghosts, hovering in every hallway, made it impossible to breathe, and all the while, through the chaos and devastation, one question hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. "Where's Emily?" Strange clues. The Anderson home, now quiet in the eerie hours of morning, hovered in a state of suspended disbelief. Laura sat on the couch with a blanket draped over her shoulders, trembling as though the chill in the air had seeped into her very bones. Her eyes were red, burning, her voice silent from hours of weeping. Peter stood by the kitchen counter, a forgotten coffee cup in hand, gripping it so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Neither of them spoke as detectives scoured their house for answers, any answers, to how the worst night of their lives became a reality. The officers had tried to keep their tone calm, clinical, but the presence of their flashlights cutting through corners and their low-voiced conversations brought an ominous weight to the situation. The moments dragged on, growing more surreal with every second. "Mrs. Anderson," one officer called out gently, shuffling toward her with a notepad. Laura flinched slightly, like a ghost startled back into her body. "Yes?" The word barely escaped her throat. "I know it's difficult, but we need to ask you a couple of clarifying questions. You mentioned earlier that Emily took your son out last night. She didn't say where, but was there anything unusual about her behavior beforehand? Anything different that stood out?" Laura furrowed her brow, pulling the blanket tighter around her as she dug through fragments of memory. "She seemed anxious, I think," she began carefully, her voice shaky. "I mean, Emily is usually reserved, independent. She's a teenager, so sometimes she's distant. But last night, something felt off. I didn't mention it before. I didn't think it meant anything at the time." She broke off, biting her lip. "Off? How?" the officer pressed, his pen poised. "I don't know. She wasn't snapping at Ethan the way she usually does. She even smiled when she called it a secret mission." Laura grimaced. "That's not like her. She never smiles when it's about Ethan." Peter, overhearing, scoffed from the counter. "That's putting it lightly." He finally broke his silence and turned to face them, his voice sharper than intended. "Emily hasn't exactly been thrilled about her younger brother for years. She avoids him. God forbid anyone suggests she babysit him. She'd roll her eyes halfway across the room." Laura shot him a warning glare but couldn't argue. "She seemed happy to take him last night, almost too happy, and I didn't question it. I should have." Her voice cracked on the last sentence and she buried her face in her hands. "Did she take anything with her?" the officer asked, his tone shifting. "Anything unusual? A bag? Supplies? Something that could have indicated why she went out?" Peter hesitated, the coffee cup halfway to his lips before he shook his head. "She just left like she always does. Casually." He stopped, thinking harder. "No, wait. Her backpack. She had her backpack. And before that I saw her rooting around in the garage, thought it was weird, but I didn't..." He cut himself off, suddenly enraged at his own negligence. I didn't think anything of it. He slammed the coffee cup onto the counter, liquid sloshing over the sides. The officer made a note. We'll need to check the garage then. Another officer had already begun canvassing the area and re-entered the room with a measured but grim expression. Detective, we found this near the woods where the body was discovered. He handed over a plastic evidence bag containing a faded scrap of paper. The detective turned it in his hands, frowning, then looked back at Peter and Laura. Do you recognize this? Laura leaned forward, her face already contorting into panic as she saw what was sealed inside the bag. It was a handwritten note, but the words weren't what struck her immediately. It was the faint, uneven lines drawn in crayon on the back. Ethan's crayon. This is Ethan's, Laura said hoarsely, her hands trembling as she reached for the bag but stopped short of touching it. Peter stepped closer. What does it say? His voice carried an edge of dread, like he didn't truly want the answer. The detective tilted the bag toward the light and read aloud, though the handwriting was clearly Emily's. Follow me, and don't tell anyone, okay? It's a game. We'll be back soon. Don't cry. It's a secret mission. Peter exhaled sharply, his hands digging into his hair. Jesus Christ, he muttered under his breath. Christ, what the hell? You're telling me she wrote this? My daughter wrote this? The officer nodded grimly. It would seem so. Did she have any history of planning pranks or games like this? No, Laura whispered weakly. This wasn't a prank. The weight of the truth began crushing her as she sat trembling on the couch. She planned this. She knew exactly how to get him to follow her. As the detectives pieced together more information, things became increasingly unsettling. Evidence found in the woods included footprints, not just Ethan's small sneakers but larger, mismatched adult ones trailing alongside his. Investigators confirmed there had been someone else present, likely an accomplice. This revelation sent a chill across the room. Not only was Ethan lured out, one officer explained to Peter and Laura, but it appears someone else was involved. These shoe prints. They don't match either Emily's or Ethan's footwear. Who? Peter demanded, his voice breaking somewhere between a shout and a sob. He was unraveling faster with every detail. Who the hell else was there? What do you mean someone else was involved? We don't know yet, sir, the officer replied calmly. But given the evidence, we're working to identify the third party. Laura's voice broke in. Could it be a friend? She glanced at Peter hesitantly, her voice dropping. Maybe that boy she's been sneaking off with, you've seen him too, haven't you, Peter? That older boy in the truck, what's his name? Oh my God! Her hands flew to her mouth. Peter nodded stiffly, his fists clenched. She's been sneaking out with some deadbeat for months. Hadn't brought him around. Not that I'd let anyone like him in my house. His voice sharpened viciously. Whoever this guy is, he sure as hell has his filthy fingerprints all over this. More unsettling clues began piling up. Fingerprints were found on the crumpled paper near Ethan's body. A nearby tree trunk bore scuffs, likely where the boy had stumbled or tried helplessly to climb. And then, buried under leaves not far from the scene, police uncovered something chilling. Emily's cell phone, powered off but intact. The officers examined the device closely and confirmed that its last series of texts matched timestamps leading up to Ethan's disappearance. Messages with the name Jack appeared on screen, a name neither Peter nor Laura recognized at first. I knew it, Peter hissed to himself, pacing furiously across the room. He slammed a fist against the wall, his eyes wild with fury. This is that bastard. That's her goddamn boyfriend, isn't it? Jack! Laura looked up in panic. It was him. It's him, Peter. How could she? Why would Emily do this? Her voice rose in desperation, cracking under unimaginable grief. The officers exchanged glances but said nothing. The evidence only pointed in one direction. Emily had planned everything, but the involvement of this unknown figure, Jack, suggested there was more to the story, much more. For Peter and Laura, the mounting clues, the note, the footprints, the texts, were unbearable. Their home, once warm and filled with memories, now felt alien, haunted by dark secrets they couldn't understand. Something had shattered irreparably in their family, and each new piece of evidence only drove them further into despair. Worse still, neither of them could answer the question gnawing at their minds. Where was Emily now, and what had she done? The evidence that betrays Emily. For a long time, Emily had been the missing piece in the Anderson family's unfolding tragedy. Her disappearance left her parents paralyzed with a mix of fury, grief, and confusion. But as detectives pushed deeper into the investigation, Emily's whereabouts began to matter less than the overwhelming pile of evidence that seemed to betray her. It started with Jack. Detectives caught up to him at his apartment, a dingy one-bedroom unit across town, littered with pizza boxes and empty beer cans. He acted relaxed at first, leaning against his peeling doorframe with lazy defiance when they arrived, but his confidence quickly crumbled under questioning. A telltale tremble in his hands betrayed what his cocky smirk tried to conceal. Jack wasn't ready for the storm he'd unleashed. The interrogation didn't take long. With each pointed question from the detectives, Jack's rebellious charm faded, replaced by a growing, unmistakable crack in his resolve. And then, when confronted with evidence, the note found near Ethan's body, Emily's cell phone logs, and even the matching shoe prints to his worn-out boots, Jack caved. "It wasn't supposed to go like that," he muttered, his eyes darting to the floor of the interrogation room. His voice was low and uneven, as though someone had squeezed all the bravado out of him. "I swear to God it wasn't my idea. Emily, she planned the whole thing." This wasn't news the detectives were unprepared for, but hearing Jack openly implicate Emily still made them pause. They pressed him for more details. "She didn't tell me everything at first," Jack continued, his words spilling out now as though he could no longer hold them back. "Just said that she wanted to scare her parents a little, make them sweat. Said her dad favors her little brother, Ethan, like his life depends on it, and she was sick of being invisible. Dumb suburban family drama, you know? I didn't think it was serious." The detective opposite Jack folded his arms and leaned forward. "But you went along with it anyway." Jack's jaw tightened. "She made it sound harmless. Like we'd take the kid to the woods, keep him out there a few hours. Tops. She swore no one would get hurt. And yet a 6-year-old boy is dead, and Emily is nowhere to be found," the detective shot back, his voice icy. Jack's head fell into his hands. "I didn't mean for any of that to happen. I didn't know she'd push it this far." He paused, his voice trembling. "That night, it just got out of control." While Jack's confession was illuminating, it wasn't the linchpin that sealed Emily's guilt. That came when detectives began piecing together the overwhelming breadth of evidence against her. With Jack's testimony framing the narrative, the items they'd collected now began to paint a clearer, and more damning, picture of Emily's involvement. First, there was her cell phone. Forensic analysis showed a series of text messages exchanged between Emily and Jack in the days leading up to Ethan's disappearance. Most of the texts were vague, but certain lines stood out like glaring red flags. "Emily, December 2nd, 10:47 p.m. Everything's planned. You just have to be there on time, he'll never see it coming. Jack, December 2nd, 10:50 p.m. You sure they won't find out? Suburbans freak over this kind of stuff. Emily, December 2nd, 10:52 p.m. Trust me, they'll panic and they'll finally pay attention to me for once, just don't screw up." Other texts from the night of Ethan's disappearance completed the chain of damning evidence. Jack, December 6th, 8:32 p.m. We're out front, you ready? Emily, Dec 6th, 8:34 p.m. Give me 5, he's an easy sell. Secret mission, he loves that stuff. Emily, December 6th, 8:50 p.m. This is going to be perfect. Next came the physical evidence. The garage yielded several items that appeared disturbingly out of place. A length of rope, a flashlight streaked with mud, and Emily's own fingerprints on both. These items matched descriptions Jack had provided during his confession, further tightening the noose around Emily's culpability. And then, there was the note. Investigators already knew it had been written by Emily, but what concerned them most was the calculated tone. She hadn't dashed it off in a fit of frustration or desperation. She'd thought it through, using her knowledge of Ethan's trusting and playful nature against him. The note's phrasing, casual, almost cheerful, cut through everyone who read it. "Follow me and don't tell anyone, okay? It's a game. We'll be back soon. Don't cry, it's a secret mission." Even Peter, who'd struggled to believe his daughter was capable of intentional malice, couldn't deny the implications. She wrote this?" he'd murmured numbly when detectives showed him the evidence. His face, normally stern and composed, twisted into something unrecognizably fragile. He looked at Laura, his voice barely above a whisper. How did we not see this coming? The final piece of evidence came when they searched Ethan's room. Folded neatly in his bedside drawer beneath a pile of his favorite superhero-themed socks was another note written in Emily's handwriting. This one wasn't as carefully crafted, it looked more like a rough brainstorm she'd abandoned, but it betrayed early glimpses of her plan. The short lines written in uneven penmanship chilled the officers who found it. "Take backpack, say it's for Dad's gift. Secret mission =, no questions. Make it fun =, no tears. Away for a while =, reality check for parents." Finally noticed. The bullet points, the thin and deliberate nature of how she had listed them, painted Emily as someone who had planned down to the tiniest detail. When Laura and Peter learned of the mounting evidence, the revelation splintered whatever fragile cohesion they had left. Laura's grief, already overwhelming, turned into denial and self-loathing. "She's a child," Laura shook her head, tears streaming down her face as she clutched a photo of Ethan. "She didn't mean, she couldn't, no, Peter, she wouldn't do this. She wouldn't hurt her brother." Peter, however, remained cold, his voice bordering on fury. "Wouldn't she, Laura? Look at the facts, the texts, the rope, the goddamn note. She planned this. Our daughter killed our son, for God's sake." "You're wrong," Laura whispered, her voice trembling. "It was Jack. He's manipulating her. He had to have talked her into this." "Don't," Peter snapped, whirling to face her. "Don't you dare sit here and make excuses for her. Emily is 17, not 7. She knew exactly what she was doing." Laura dissolved into sobs, her shoulders shaking violently as she sank to the floor. Peter turned away, unable to watch. He didn't cry, his anger wouldn't let him, but the cold, hollow look in his eyes reflected the truth he couldn't escape. Their daughter, their brilliant, capable Emily, had betrayed them all. As the evidence stacked up and Jack's confession sealed the deal, Emily's innocence crumbled under the weight of irrefutable proof. What was once a desperate search for answers became something far darker, a horrifying acknowledgement that the call was coming from inside the house. Emily, their bright oldest daughter, wasn't missing. She was running. And now, the question haunting Laura and Peter wasn't just why Emily did it, it was what she'd do next. The harsh punishment and psychological fallout. The trial of Emily Anderson became a local spectacle, the kind of headline-grabbing courtroom drama that parents whispered about at school drop-offs, and reporters dissected on the evening news. "A family betrayed from within," one headline read, while another declared, "When sibling jealousy turns deadly." For the Anderson family, though, it wasn't some sensationalized story, it was a living nightmare that dragged on for months. The courtroom battle. Laura and Peter Anderson sat together in the front row of the courtroom every day, but the distance between them felt like miles. They barely spoke, barely looked at one another. Peter's hand would instinctively ball into a fist whenever he saw Emily led into the courtroom in handcuffs, her gaze glued to the floor, her once bright eyes now dulled by exhaustion. Laura, on the other hand, looked at Emily with a desperate, pleading sorrow, as though willing her daughter to magically turn to her after all this time and whisper, "I'm sorry." But Emily never did. Jack's plea deal came early in the process. His lawyers painted him as a reckless, but easily influenced young man who had been lured into the plan by Emily's bitter motives. His confession certainly didn't help Emily's case. In exchange for his cooperation with law enforcement and his full testimony against her, Jack avoided a life sentence and instead received 20 years in prison for manslaughter and kidnapping. "He's not innocent," Peter growled to Laura when the deal was announced, his resentment for Jack sharp enough to break glass. "He killed Ethan," but to Laura, it was Emily's trial that truly fractured what little was left of their family. The prosecution painted an unforgiving picture of her intentions, a bright, high-achieving teen driven by jealousy and entitlement. They paraded the evidence ruthlessly. Her text to Jack, the notes found in Ethan's room, the rope from the garage, and Jack's testimony, which described Emily as the architect of the entire plan. "She wanted attention," the prosecutor declared during closing arguments, gesturing toward Emily, who sat motionless at the defense table. "She wanted her parents to suffer, but most of all she wanted Ethan out of the way. And in her efforts to achieve those selfish desires, she destroyed her family and took the life of an innocent 6-year-old boy." Emily had refused to take the stand, her lawyer advising her that it would do more harm than good. But her silence only seemed to deepen the court's perception of her as cold, unfeeling, and remorseless. The verdict. It took the jury less than 6 hours to reach a decision. When the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict, Laura instinctively reached for Peter's hand, but he didn't take it. She clasped her trembling hands together instead, her nails digging into her palms as the words rang out through the heavy silence of the courtroom. "Guilty of murder in the first degree." Next came the sentencing. The judge, stoic and uncompromising, delivered the harshest sentence allowable. Life without parole. Emily didn't cry when the sentence was read. She didn't flinch or beg. Instead, she simply nodded as though she had expected it all along. "You took the life of an innocent child," the judge said starkly, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the courtroom's collective grief. "Your actions were born out of malice, jealousy, and selfishness, and for that, you will spend the rest of your life reflecting on the irreversible consequences of those actions." Behind her, Laura broke into quiet, uncontrollable sobs, while Peter, once again, stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack. Emily was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, her parents watching quietly as she disappeared behind the heavy double doors. That was the last time they saw her, the fallout. After the trial ended, the Anderson family completely fell apart. Their home, once an image of suburban perfection, became unbearable to return to. Every corner, every photograph, every sound carried the weight of memories that now felt like too much to handle. Peter stayed in the house longer than Laura, perhaps out of sheer stubbornness. But he took little care of it anymore. The formerly immaculate lawn became overgrown, the swing set in the yard rusted, and dust accumulated in rooms that had once been filled with Ethan's laughter. Peter slept on the couch most nights, unable to step into Ethan's room, or bear the thought of sleeping in the bed he once shared with Laura. Laura, on the other hand, could no longer live there at all. She moved into a small, rented apartment on the other side of town, leaving behind nearly everything except a few of Ethan's belongings, a pair of his sneakers, his favorite toy truck, and one of his superhero capes. She found herself retreating further and further into isolation, avoiding friends, family gatherings, or anything that reminded her of the life she once had. Her grief was a weight she carried alone, but her guilt was heavier. The question consumed her daily: was it my fault? She replayed every argument, every slamming door, every moment she didn't notice Emily's growing resentment. And above all, she tortured herself over that moment in the kitchen, the moment she let Emily take Ethan without question, without stopping her to ask, "Where are you going?" Peter dealt with his grief differently. At first he buried himself in work, refusing to entertain any conversation about the trial, Emily, or Ethan. But as weeks turned into months, the anger he carried began to fester. It turned inward, becoming a brutal wave of guilt that he couldn't outrun. He started drinking quietly after work, a slow downward spiral that no one, not even Laura, witnessed fully because they no longer spoke. The rare visits. Peter eventually visited Emily, once. Months after her sentencing, he stood in the sterile visiting room of the state prison, waiting awkwardly at a cold metal table until his daughter was led in. She looked thinner, her once polished appearance replaced by the gray uniform of her new reality. When she sat down across from him, Peter didn't know what to say. He stared at her for what felt like an eternity, his jaw tightening as he searched his mind for the right words. "Why?" he finally whispered, his voice breaking despite himself. "Why did you do it, Emily?" Emily lowered her eyes to the table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "I don't know," she said softly. "That's not good enough," Peter snapped, slamming his palm against the table. His voice was loud enough to draw the attention of the guards nearby. "You don't know? You tore our family apart and you don't even know why?" Her voice stayed steady, but tears welled in her eyes. "I just wanted you to notice me, Dad," she said. "For once, I wanted you to see me." Peter leaned back, stunned into silence. He wanted to scream at her, yell about all the life she had destroyed, but he couldn't. He simply stood, shaking his head, a hollow, aching man. "You're not my daughter anymore," he said hoarsely before walking away. The endless divide. The Anderson family never recovered. Laura and Peter eventually divorced, unable to face one another without seeing every painful memory etched into each other's faces. Laura left town entirely, moving to a quieter place where no one knew the name Anderson. Peter remained behind in the house for another year, quietly drowning in anger and regret before selling it and moving into a small condo. For both of them, Ethan's death and Emily's betrayal were open wounds that never healed. They carried the weight of their son's absence and the moral questions that gnawed at them. Could we have done something to prevent this? Did we fail them both? And Emily, serving life in prison, became nothing more than a shadow of the vibrant, ambitious girl she once was. Reports filtered back to Laura from time to time, brief updates from lawyers or prison staff, but Laura couldn't bring herself to visit. Occasionally she'd sit alone in her quiet apartment and wonder, is she still my daughter, or is she someone I no longer know? Ultimately, the Anderson story became less of a courtroom drama for the public and more of a grim cautionary tale about fractured homes, unchecked jealousy, and the devastating price of neglecting the emotional needs of a family. The moral lesson. In the tapestry of suburban America, the Anderson tragedy became more than just the heartbreaking story of a fractured family and a lost child. It morphed into something larger, something haunting, casting a long shadow over every neighborhood. At its core, The story became a reflection of what happens when familial bonds, those invisible threads that should bind people together, fray and snap from neglect, resentment, and unspoken pain. It became a cautionary tale, a societal mirror pointing toward questions that often go unanswered in the quest for success, appearances, and perfection. The warning sign society missed the Anderson family was, from the outside, the picture of suburban bliss. Peter was the classic breadwinner, Laura the doting mother who planned bake sales and perfected holiday decorations. Their house had a meticulous lawn, kids who participated in after-school activities, and warm light spilling from its windows every evening. Neighbors rarely, if ever, saw turmoil behind that perfect white picket fence. That, of course, was the problem. As spectators read about the case in local papers, discussions shifted toward what could have been done to avoid the tragedy. The more people digested the story, the clearer it became. The Anderson household wasn't a model of perfection at all. Underneath the polished exterior lay the simmering dissatisfaction and deep-rooted jealousy that eventually turned deadly. And these cracks, it seemed, had been there all along, even if no one had noticed. Psychologists who weighed in on the case began highlighting the warning signs illustrated by Emily's behavior. She was socially withdrawn, emotionally distant, and bitter toward her younger brother in ways her parents had dismissed as mere sibling rivalry. But there was more to it than that. Emily's spiral wasn't the impulsive act of a rebellious teen. It had festered for years as she silently stewed in her feelings of rejection and invisibility. For neighbors who had admired the Andersons from afar, the revelation was shocking. Suddenly, what seemed like typical family tensions were seen in an entirely new light. How many other Emilys are out there? One feature article in the Chicago Tribune asked. And how many parents are too distracted, too busy, or too comfortable to see it? The role of neglect in the modern family. At the heart of this tragedy lay the dynamic between Emily and her parents, Peter and Laura. To Emily, Ethan wasn't just her younger brother, he was her competition. From the moment Ethan was born, Emily felt as though she had been pushed into the shadows. Every smile her father offered Ethan, every moment of pride in her mother's eyes as they watched him play in the yard, added another brick to the wall of resentment building in Emily's heart. "It's just jealousy," Peter had told Laura once when Emily muttered something sharp about Ethan getting all the attention. "She'll grow out of it, siblings are always like this." But she didn't grow out of it, and the family's failure, whether out of fear or ignorance, to address those feelings head-on, was a critical omission. What Peter saw as ambition and focus in Emily was, in reality, her desperate attempt to reclaim some shred of relevance in their family dynamic. What Laura heard as sarcasm and teenage defiance were actually screams of frustration, buried under quiet, simmering resentment. The Anderson case revealed the subtle but deadly consequences of what so many modern families struggle with: emotional neglect. It's not just absent love that pushes children to dark places, it's conditional love. Love that shines only when children achieve certain milestones or align with parental expectations. For Emily, it wasn't enough to be a straight-A student, a leader, and a soon-to-be Ivy Leaguer, because all those achievements were drowned out by her father's unfailing devotion to Ethan. The cost of love not evenly distributed, the Andersons' experience warned, is the price of isolation and invisibility that some children pay. The failures of communication. Another striking lesson emerged from the Anderson tragedy: the absolute failure of communication within the family. There were no heart-to-hearts, no meaningful spaces for Emily to express her pain. Peter, always preoccupied with work and his expectations for Ethan's future, didn't stop to ask how Emily was truly feeling, or why she seemed to be retreating further and further into herself. Laura tried to create harmony, yes, but her efforts amounted to treating surface wounds while ignoring the infection beneath. Instead of sitting down with Emily and giving her a safe space to speak, the Anderson household opted for the easier route: distraction. They distracted themselves with cupcakes and recitals, family outings, and choreographed holiday dinners. All those Instagram-perfect moments came at the expense of honest connection, leaving Emily to marinate in her self-doubt and anger. How many fights could have been avoided? How many tragedies could have been prevented, wrote one columnist in The Atlantic, if parents simply listened to their children, not to their accomplishments, not to their schedules, but to their pain, their anger, and their alienation? A societal reflection. The Anderson case didn't just call out family dynamics, though. It also pointed a finger at society at large. Modern American families, it seemed, were failing in ways no one wanted to admit, prioritizing success over solidarity, image over intimacy, and ambition over affection. The Andersons weren't unique, they were emblematic. "How often do we reward the golden child while failing the quieter one?" asked a prominent social worker during a news panel covering the case. "How many families channel their hopes and dreams through just one child, leaving the others feeling neglected or invisible?" Emily's story served as a harsh warning against the dangers of idolizing one child while devaluing another. It showed how easily resentment can breed, how it simmers beneath the surface until it inevitably boils over. The price of ignoring mental health. One glaring aspect of the story was its commentary on mental health. Despite being a high achiever, Emily was clearly struggling with feelings of inadequacy, loneliness, and emotional exhaustion. Yet, due in part to stigma and a lack of resources, she was never given the support she needed to unpack those feelings safely. With proper intervention, this might have been avoided, argued Dr. Teresa Quinn, a clinical psychologist who analyzed the case during a primetime television segment. Emily's frustrations could have been diffused. Had she been given an outlet to process her emotions, through therapy or open communication, this tragedy might never have occurred. But, as is often the case in families, we ignore the signs until it's too late. Lessons for parents, schools, and society. What the Anderson case ultimately left behind was a clarion call to parents, educators, and communities alike. The message was clear. Fractured families aren't made in one day. They are created over years of small, invisible missteps, missed moments, unchecked rivalries, unmet needs. For parents, it raised critical questions. Are we truly listening to our children, or just skimming over their emotions, assuming they'll grow out of their challenges? Are we inadvertently creating competition between siblings rather than fostering unity? Do we love all our children equally, or passively let one become the favorite? Schools and communities too were encouraged to refocus their efforts on addressing jealousy, bullying, and emotional neglect before they become unmanageable. Teachers, counselors, and family friends were urged to look deeper. Not every perfect family is a happy one. The eternal echo of the Anderson family. In the end, the Anderson tragedy didn't just change one family. It sent ripples through countless others, prompting deeper conversations. Families that once swept sibling conflicts under the rug began paying closer attention. Parents who might have dismissed a child's anger as just being a teenager started asking more meaningful questions. Communities that ignored mental health slowly began seeing it as a necessity rather than a luxury. But for Laura and Peter, those lessons came too late. They now lived separately, bound only by their shared grief and haunted by their memories of Ethan and Emily. And for Emily, now serving life in prison, the lessons were tainted by a lifetime of regret. The question their story leaves is as haunting as their silence. How many families, how many Emilys, how many Ethans are still out there, screaming to be heard?